The winter of 1876 came for the Colorado Territory like a thief in the night. It stole the color from the world, leaving behind nothing but white snow and gray sky. The snow fell without end, burying the mountains, silencing the forest. In a small cabin at the edge of all that emptiness, Sarah Miller watched the world disappear. It had only been 3 months since the influenza took her husband, James. 3 months of being a widow, a single mother to her 6-year-old daughter, Emma, in a place that didn't care if you lived or died. The grief was a constant cold in her chest, as unchanging as the mountains outside her window. "Mama, when will the snow stop?" Emma's small voice cut through the silence. She sat by the fire, a rag doll in her lap, her face lit by the dancing flames. Sarah forced a smile. "Soon, my love. Winter always feels longest at the start." She added another log to the fire, the last of their easy supply. James would have known what to do. James would have been prepared for a winter this cruel. He was always prepared. But James was gone. "Is Papa cold where he is?" Emma asked, her question a tiny, sharp icicle to Sarah's heart. "No, sweetheart," Sarah said, pulling her daughter into a hug. "Papa is somewhere warm, watching over us." She prayed it was true. As darkness swallowed the day, the wind began to howl. It sounded like a hungry animal clawing at the walls of their little cabin. Sarah had just tucked Emma into bed when she heard it. A different sound. Not the wind. 3 sharp knocks on the door. Fear, cold and immediate, seized her. She reached for James's rifle above the fireplace. No one traveled these parts in winter. Not unless they were desperate or dangerous. The knocks came again, louder this time, demanding. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling just enough to betray her terror. A deep voice answered, muffled by the wind and the thick wooden door. "I seek shelter. From the storm." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. "State your business." "I am Cold Fox, of the Ute people. The storm is bad. I need shelter for the night." She'd heard of the Ute. They were mostly peaceful, but tensions were rising. More settlers meant less land, and less land meant trouble. Still, turning a man away in a blizzard like this was a death sentence. Her Christian upbringing warred with the harsh reality of frontier survival. Taking a deep breath, she unbolted the door and opened it a crack. The man outside was tall, broad-shouldered, his face a mask of exhaustion. Snow clung to his long black hair. He was Ute, no doubt, his features marked with the traditional lines of his people. "You can use the barn," Sarah said, the rifle still held firm in her hands. "There's hay. It'll keep you from the wind." The man nodded, his gratitude visible even in the dim light. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, he stumbled, catching himself against the doorframe. He was limping badly. "Are you injured?" The question escaped her before she could stop it. "It is nothing," he said. But a grimace of pain told a different story. An animal trap. Sarah's conscience screamed at her. She couldn't leave him like this. "Come inside," she said, her voice tight with a decision she already feared. "I'll look at that leg. Then you go to the barn." He entered the cabin, his presence filling the small space. He was bigger up close, and the smell of pine and cold air clung to him. He sat by the fire as she directed, and she retrieved the small medical kit James had kept. The gash on his leg was deep, angry, and poorly wrapped. It wasn't just a cut. It looked jagged, torn. "This needs stitches," she said, trying to keep her hands steady. As she worked, threading the needle, Emma appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Mama, who is that?" "Go back to bed, Emma." But it was too late. Emma crept closer. "Are you a real Indian?" Sarah started to scold her, but Cold Fox spoke, his voice soft. "Yes, little one, I am." As Sarah finished the last stitch, the storm outside seemed to rage with a new fury. The wind shrieked, and the cabin shuddered under its assault. "The storm worsens," Cold Fox said, his gaze fixed on the rattling window. Sarah knew he was right. The barn wasn't safe. No one would be safe outside tonight. "You can sleep by the fire," she said, hating the weakness in her voice. "But at first light, you leave." He gave a solemn nod. "You have my word." Later, as Emma snuggled into her side, she whispered, "Is he a good Indian or a bad Indian, Mama?" Sarah looked at the dark shape of the man sleeping by her hearth. "I don't know, honey," she whispered back. "We'll just have to wait and see." She had a terrible feeling, a knot of ice in her stomach, that the storm wasn't the only danger that had found its way to her door tonight. The wound on his leg. It didn't look like it came from any animal trap she'd ever seen. 3 days passed. The blizzard didn't just continue. It became a living thing, a white monster trying to swallow their tiny cabin whole. The world outside was gone, buried. Drifts of snow piled up against the windows, plunging the cabin into a perpetual twilight. The wind never stopped its screaming. Sarah had no choice but to let Cold Fox stay. To send him out into that would be murder. And despite her fear, she couldn't do that. "The pass will be blocked for weeks," Cold Fox said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. He was staring out the one window not completely covered by snow. "No one can travel now." Sarah's heart sank. "Our supplies, they won't last. Not with 3 of us." "I will not be a burden," he said, turning from the window. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "When the snow stops, I will hunt." She wanted to believe him. But in this endless white hell, what was there to hunt? He seemed to read her thoughts. The elk moved to lower ground. Rabbits tunneled deep. There is always food if you know where to look. He spoke with a quiet certainty that was somehow both comforting and unsettling. He'd been useful, she had to admit. He split firewood with an almost silent efficiency, his powerful arms making short work of the logs. He had reinforced the barn door, protecting her animals. He'd even carved a tiny perfect bird for Emma from a scrap of wood. The little girl was completely enchanted by him. She followed him around the small cabin, a constant stream of questions about his people, his life. "My people tell stories during the winter moons," he told Emma one evening, his voice a stark contrast to the howling wind. "When the world sleeps and dreams." "Tell me one," Emma begged. He looked at Sarah, a silent question. She gave a slight nod, and he began a story about the creator spirit and the stars. His voice was mesmerizing, and Sarah found herself listening, forgetting for a moment the dwindling flour and the suffocating isolation. She forgot the lie about his leg. When Emma was asleep, a fragile peace settled over the cabin. "You speak English well," Sarah said, breaking the silence. A shadow passed over his face. "A mission school. They tried to make me forget who I am." He looked into the fire, but Sarah knew he was seeing something else entirely. "Now I use their words to fight for our land." "And are you winning?" she asked softly. His expression hardened. "They make promises with one hand and sign them away with the other. Your people want what my people have always protected." The accusation hung in the air between them. "James and I just wanted a farm," she said, her voice defensive. "A place to be left alone." "And my people have wanted that for 1,000 winters," he replied, his voice flat. Before she could answer, a loud crash came from outside. It wasn't the storm. It was the sound of splintering wood. Cold Fox was on his feet in an instant, moving with a speed that startled her. "Wolves," he said, his voice tight. "In the smokehouse." Panic flared in Sarah's chest. The meat in that smokehouse was all they had. "Stay here," he ordered, grabbing James's rifle. "No," she said, pulling her shawl around her. "That's our food. I'm coming." They plunged into the blizzard. The cold was a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. The lantern she carried cast wild, dancing shadows. They could hear snarling as they got closer. 3 large wolves, their eyes glowing like embers in the lantern light, were tearing into their winter's supply of meat. Cold Fox raised the rifle. But he didn't fire. Instead, he began to speak in his own language. The words were low, guttural, almost like a chant. The wolves stopped. They looked at him, their heads cocked. Slowly, he lowered the rifle. He took a piece of meat and tossed it away from the smokehouse. Then another. He was luring them away. It was incredible. It was also a lie. Sarah saw it in a flash. The way he held the rifle, familiar and steady. The way he moved, not like a man afraid of wolves, but like a man who understood violence. As he bent down to secure the smokehouse door, his shirt pulled tight across his back. And there, just beneath the fabric, she saw the dark, puckered edges of another wound. A round wound. A bullet hole. This man wasn't running from a storm. He was running from a gun. And he had brought the trouble, whatever it was, right to her door. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, sounded like a footstep. She lay beside Emma, James's rifle clutched in her hands under the blanket. Its cold metal a small, terrifying comfort. Cold Fox slept by the fire, a still, dark shape in the gloom. But he wasn't just a traveler seeking shelter anymore. He was a lie. A man with a bullet in him, pretending it was a scrape from an animal trap. Who shot him? And were they still out there, in the storm, looking for him? The questions circled in her mind like vultures. The cabin, once her sanctuary, now felt like a trap. She was locked inside a wooden box with a stranger who was running from something violent enough to leave him shot and bleeding in a blizzard. The next morning, the lie sat between them, unspoken but heavy as a tombstone. He knew she'd seen the wound on his back. She could tell by the way he avoided her eyes, by the new tension in his shoulders. They moved around the small space in a careful, silent dance of mistrust. Emma was the only one who didn't feel it. She chattered away, showing Cold Fox her rag doll, asking him for another story. His face would soften when he looked at the child, a flicker of something genuine in his guarded eyes. But when he looked at Sarah, the mask was back in place. "You should have told me the truth," she finally said, her voice low so Emma wouldn't hear. They were by the fire, the storm still raging outside. He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. He stared into the flames for a long moment before he spoke. "The truth would have put you in more danger." "And lying doesn't?" she shot back, her fear making her angry. "Who are you? Why are you really here?" He turned to face her, and the weariness in his eyes was so profound, it almost broke through her anger. "My name is Cold Fox. That is the truth. I was meeting a man, a friend, a white man. His name was James." Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. "James? My James?" He nodded slowly. "He was helping my people. There is a man, Henderson, a land agent. He is using false deeds to steal our wintering grounds. Your husband found the proof. He had the real maps, the original treaty papers. He was going to expose Henderson." The world tilted. James, her quiet, steady James, involved in something like this? It didn't make sense. "He died of influenza," she said, the words sounding hollow even to her. Cold Fox shook his head, his expression grim. "No. He was murdered. Henderson's men. They found out he was going to the federal marshal. I was supposed to meet him, to travel with him for protection. I was too late. I found him. They were still there." He paused, and the only sound was the howling wind. "I took what they killed him for. The papers. They shot me as I ran." He reached inside his worn leather shirt and pulled out a small, oilskin-wrapped parcel. He placed it on the table between them. "This is why they are hunting me. This is what your husband died for." Sarah stared at the parcel. It was the key to a truth she never knew existed. Her husband wasn't the victim of a random illness. He was a hero, murdered for doing the right thing. And his killer's men were out there, in the snow, hunting the man who sat in her cabin. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the storm. A sharp, metallic click from outside the front door. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of a rifle being cocked. They weren't just out there anymore. They were here. "Get down!" Cold Fox whispered, shoving her and the table toward the floor as a splinter of wood erupted from the door. A gunshot echoed, unnaturally loud in the sudden silence of the wind. They weren't knocking. They were shooting their way in. The cabin was no longer a shelter. It was a tomb. The blizzard that had trapped them had also trapped their enemies. And now the fight was here, on her doorstep. Cold Fox scrambled to the window, peering through a tiny crack. "Two of them," he hissed. "They're using the snowdrift for cover." Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. Just minutes ago, her biggest fear was a dwindling food supply. Now, there were men outside trying to kill them. Men who had murdered her husband. The grief she had carried for months turned white-hot, forging itself into a cold, hard rage. They would not take anything else from her. "Emma," she whispered, her voice shaking. She crawled to the bedroom where her daughter was huddled under the covers, crying. "Stay down, baby. No matter what you hear, you stay under the bed, and you don't make a sound." Emma just nodded, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored Sarah's own. Sarah grabbed the spare rifle James kept in the bedroom, her hands moving with a purpose she didn't know she possessed. She checked the load. It was ready. When she returned to the main room, Cold Fox had overturned the heavy oak table, creating a makeshift barricade. "They think it's just you in here," Sarah said, her voice low and steady. "They don't know about me, or this." She held up the second rifle. A flicker of surprise, of respect, showed in his eyes. "Good. We have the advantage of surprise." Another shot rang out, this one shattering the small window above the sink. Glass sprayed across the floor. They were testing them, trying to draw them out. "They'll wait for the storm to die down a little," Cold Fox said. "Then they'll rush the door." He looked at the oilskin parcel, which he'd tucked into his belt. "They want this. They won't risk burning the cabin." "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her knuckles white where she gripped the rifle. "We make them think there's only one gun," he said. "You stay hidden. When they break the door, they will come for me. That is when you shoot." The plan was simple. It was desperate. It was all they had. They waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were the wind, the crackling fire, and the frantic beating of Sarah's own heart. She crouched behind the overturned wood box, her rifle pointed at the door, her view of Cold Fox partially obscured. He was a statue, his own rifle aimed, waiting. Then, the assault began. A heavy thud against the door, then another. They were using a log as a battering ram. The wood groaned, splintered. Sarah's breath hitched. This was it. The door burst inward with a crash, revealing two figures silhouetted against the swirling white of the storm. They were huge, bundled in furs, their faces obscured by snow and shadow. "Nowhere left to run, Ute," one of them snarled, stepping into the cabin. He raised his rifle, aiming for Cold Fox behind the table. In that split second, everything slowed down. Sarah saw the flash from the man's rifle, heard the deafening boom. She saw Cold Fox jerk back, a cry of pain escaping his lips. He was hit. Rage, pure and primal, flooded through her. She rose from her hiding place, brought her rifle to her shoulder, and fired. The second man, who had been just behind the first, staggered back, a look of utter shock on his face, before he collapsed into the snow. One down. The first man spun around, his eyes wide with surprise at the sight of her. He was fumbling to reload, a string of curses spilling from his lips. Sarah worked the lever on her rifle, chambering another round. She was faster. She fired again. The man dropped his gun, clutching his shoulder, and fell to his knees. The fight was over in seconds. Silence descended, broken only by the man's groaning and the relentless howl of the wind. Sarah stood, the rifle still pressed to her shoulder, her body trembling uncontrollably. She had just shot two men. She had just saved their lives. Cold Fox was slumped against the wall, clutching his arm. Blood was seeping through his shirt. "Are you all right?" she breathed, rushing to his side. "Just my arm," he grunted, his face pale. You saved us." Before she could answer, a small voice came from the bedroom. "Mama?" Emma stood in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. Her eyes were fixed on the two bodies lying in the snow just outside their broken door. The innocence of her world, shattered in an instant. Sarah's victory felt hollow, the cost suddenly, terribly clear. The men who murdered her husband were stopped, but the violence they brought had invaded her home, her life, and now her daughter's memory. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that had just broken inside their lives. The man on his knees, the one she'd shot in the shoulder, started to laugh. It was a horrible, gurgling sound. "You think this is over?" He spat, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Henderson will find out. He'll send more men. He'll burn this whole valley to the ground to get those papers." Sarah stared at him, the cold reality of his words washing over her. They hadn't won. They had just survived the first wave. They were trapped in a cabin with a wounded man, a terrified child, and 2 bodies in the snow. And somewhere out there, a powerful man named Henderson now knew exactly where the evidence against him was. The blizzard was their only shield, and it wouldn't last forever. Cold Fox, gritting his teeth in pain, pushed himself up. "He's right. We can't stay here." He looked at Sarah, his eyes dark with a new urgency. "James told me he had a place. A fallback. A secret line cabin, hidden deep in the canyons. He said it was stocked. Hidden. He drew me a map." "A map?" Sarah's mind raced. James had never mentioned another cabin, but he was a careful man. It made sense. "It was on a piece of paper with the deeds," Cold Fox said. "It must be in the parcel." He pulled the oilskin packet from his belt, his movements slow and pained. His hands, slick with blood from his arm, fumbled with the ties. He couldn't open it. Sarah took it from him, her own hands shaking. She untied the knot and unfolded the stiff, waterproofed cloth. Inside were several official-looking documents, covered in legal writing. And there, tucked between them, was a hand-drawn map. It was James's handwriting. A wave of grief and love washed over her. Even from the grave, he was trying to protect them. The map showed a route through the mountains, following a frozen creek into a box canyon. A small X marked the spot. "I know this place," Cold Fox said, peering over her shoulder. "It is well hidden. But to get there, we have to go through the storm. And we have to go now." Leaving meant plunging into the blizzard, a journey that could kill them just as surely as Henderson's men. But staying was a death sentence. The man on the floor coughed, a smug, hateful look on his face. "You won't make it a mile," he sneered. Sarah looked from the map to her daughter huddled in the corner, to Cold Fox, wounded but resolute. The choice was clear. She met Cold Fox's gaze. "Get Emma ready," she said, her voice hard as iron. "I'll deal with him." She walked over to the wounded man, the rifle held steady in her hands. He looked up at her, a flicker of fear finally entering his eyes. "What are you gonna do, lady? Finish the job?" "No," Sarah said, her voice cold enough to freeze the blood dripping onto the floor. "I'm not a murderer." She took the rope from the woodbox, the same rope she used to tie down supplies. "But I'm not a fool either." She tied him up, tightly and efficiently, then dragged him into the small root cellar, locking the heavy door behind him. He could scream all he wanted. No one would hear him over the storm. With the immediate threat contained, they moved with desperate speed. Sarah packed what little food they could carry, along with blankets and ammunition. Cold Fox, using his good arm, fashioned a crude sling for Emma to ride on his back, protecting her from the worst of the wind. As they prepared to step out into the white chaos, Sarah paused at the door. She looked back at the small cabin that had been her home, her world. It was a place of love and laughter, of grief and now, of terrible violence. She was leaving it all behind. "Ready?" Cold Fox asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, took Emma's small hand, and together, the 3 of them stepped out of the broken doorway and into the heart of the storm. The wind tore at them, the snow a blinding curtain. They were a tiny, desperate family, running from a dead man's past toward a future they couldn't even imagine, with nothing but a dead man's map to guide them. The tracks they left behind were covered by the snow in seconds, as if they had never been there at all. The journey was a waking nightmare. The wind was a physical force, trying to rip them apart. The snow was so thick they could barely see a few feet ahead. Cold Fox led the way, relying on instinct and his knowledge of the mountains, the map tucked safely inside his shirt. Sarah followed close behind, her head down, one hand holding her shawl tight, the other clutching the rifle. Emma was a silent, bundled weight on Cold Fox's back. Hours bled into one another. The world was a symphony of howling wind and their own ragged breathing. Every step was a battle against the cold that seeped into their bones, a deep, aching cold that promised a final, peaceful sleep if they just gave in. But they didn't. They pushed on, fueled by a desperate shared will to survive. Just as Sarah felt she couldn't take another step, that her legs would simply give out, Cold Fox stopped. He pointed through the swirling snow. Ahead was a dark wall of rock, a sheer cliff face. "The canyon!" he shouted over the wind. "The cabin should be at the base of the cliff." They stumbled forward, using the rock wall as a guide and a shield from the worst of the wind. And then they saw it. It was barely visible, a small, low structure built right into the rock, its roof covered in a thick blanket of snow. It looked less like a cabin and more like a cave. The door was a simple, heavy plank of wood. Cold Fox pushed it open, and they collapsed inside, out of the wind's relentless assault. The cabin was tiny, just one room. But it was dry. In the corner was a stack of firewood, a small stove, and a crate of supplies. James. He had thought of everything. As Cold Fox worked on starting a fire, his face etched with pain from his wounded arm, Sarah unpacked their meager supplies. Emma, finally released from her cocoon of blankets, immediately curled up by the slowly warming stove and fell into an exhausted sleep. "We made it," Sarah whispered, the words feeling inadequate. Cold Fox nodded, his eyes closing for a moment in relief. "For now." He looked at his arm, which had started bleeding again during the trek. The makeshift bandage was soaked through. "Let me see," Sarah said, her voice gentle. She carefully cut away the sleeve of his shirt. The bullet had gone clean through the flesh of his upper arm. It was ugly, but it could have been so much worse. She cleaned it as best she could with snow and a strip of clean cloth from her own petticoat. As she worked, her fingers brushed against his skin. A warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the growing fire. In the space of 2 days, this man had gone from a terrifying stranger to her partner, her protector. They had fought together, bled together. When she was done, they sat in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the muffled howl of the storm outside. The tiny cabin felt like the only safe place in the entire world. "What happens when the storm stops?" Sarah asked, voicing the fear that lingered in the back of her mind. "We wait," Cold Fox said. "We let them think we died in the snow. When it is safe, I will take the papers to the federal marshal in Denver." He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "Henderson will not stop looking for this. He will tear these mountains apart. You and Emma. You won't be safe here anymore. Not in the valley." She knew he was right. Her old life was gone, destroyed the moment those men broke down her door. "So what do we do?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "When this is done, come with me. My people are being moved to a new reservation. It is not our home, but we will make it one. There, you would be safe. You and the little one. I would see to it." The offer hung in the air, a shocking, impossible possibility. To leave everything she had ever known, to go and live among his people. It was insane. But what was the alternative? To wait for Henderson's men to find her? To live in constant fear? She looked at this man, this Ute warrior who had saved her, who her husband had trusted. She looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Maybe the insane choice was the only choice she had left. Before she could answer, a new sound reached them. It was faint, almost lost in the storm. A scratching sound. It was coming from the back of the cabin, from the stone wall it was built against. Cold Fox was instantly alert, his good hand reaching for his rifle. They both stared at the back wall. The scratching came again, more insistent this time. It wasn't an animal. It sounded human. And then a section of the rock wall, a piece that looked no different from the rest, began to move. It swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel. A figure stood there, holding a lantern. It was an old Ute woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles. She looked at Cold Fox, then at Sarah, and spoke in her own language. Cold Fox replied, his voice a mixture of shock and reverence. "What is it? Who is she?" Sarah whispered. Cold Fox turned to her, his face a mask of disbelief. "This isn't just a line cabin," he said, his voice filled with awe. "It's an entrance to a hidden Ute settlement, my people. Some of them refuse to leave the mountains. They have been living here, in secret, for years." The old woman stepped forward and pointed at the oilskin packet in Sarah's lap. She spoke again, her voice raspy with age. Cold Fox translated, a slow dawn of understanding on his face. "She says she knows of these papers. She says my friend James, he didn't just stumble upon them. They were given to him. By their elders. They trusted him." He paused, looking at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. "This wasn't just your husband's fight. It was a plan. A partnership. And this place, he built this cabin for them, as a secret door to the outside world." The truth was bigger, more complex than she could have ever imagined. Her husband hadn't just been a good man, he'd been a secret ally, a trusted friend to a hidden people. This cabin wasn't a refuge James built for himself. It was a promise he made to them. And now, by a twist of fate she couldn't comprehend, she was here to finish what he started. The fight for the papers wasn't just for her family's survival anymore. It was for the survival of an entire community she never even knew existed. The old woman, whose name was Star That Falls, led them through the tunnel. It was a narrow, winding passage that opened up into a massive cavern, lit by dozens of small fires. The air was warm and filled with the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat. It was a hidden village, teeming with life. Families were gathered around the fires, children played in the shadows, and the low murmur of conversation echoed off the stone walls. They had survived, hidden from the world that sought to erase them. Cold Fox was greeted as a returning son. The people had heard of his mission to Denver, of his work with the white man James. They had mourned when they heard James was dead, and they had feared Cold Fox was lost as well. His return, with James's wife and child, was seen as a powerful sign. Sarah and Emma were treated not as outsiders, but as honored guests. They were given warm furs, hot food, and a quiet corner to rest. Emma, her resilience a constant source of amazement to Sarah, was quickly adopted by the other children, her blonde hair a stark contrast to their dark braids as they ran through the cavern. Star That Falls, who was the village elder, took Sarah aside. With Cold Fox translating, she told Sarah the full story. Henderson hadn't just been stealing land. He had been systematically hunting the last free bands of Ute who refused to go to the reservation. He sold their land to the railroad and took a cut of the profits. James had discovered the scheme while surveying for the railroad company. Horrified, he had sought out the hidden Ute and offered his help. The papers weren't just deeds. They were proof of Henderson's conspiracy and his campaign of murder. "Your husband had the heart of a Ute warrior," the old woman said, her ancient eyes holding Sarah's. "He died to protect our families. Now, the fight is yours." A new resolve settled in Sarah's heart. This was about more than just revenge or survival. It was about justice. It was about honoring the man she loved by finishing the work he died for. But their safety was temporary. "Henderson's man, the one you left in the cellar. When the storm breaks, he will be found," Cold Fox said, his face grim. "He will lead them here, to the valley. They will not find this cave, but they will burn everything to find you. They will destroy any chance of us getting these papers to Denver." "So we can't wait for the storm to end," Sarah realized. "We have to go now, while they think we're still hiding or dead." "It is impossible," one of the Ute elders argued. "The high pass is the only way out, and it is buried in snow. It is suicide." "There is another way," Cold Fox said, a new idea taking shape in his eyes. He looked at Sarah. The wolves. Sarah remembered the way he had spoken to the wolves outside the smokehouse, the way they had listened. It seemed like a lifetime ago. What about them? The wolves know paths the two-leggeds do not, ancient paths through the deep snow. If we follow them, they could lead us over the mountains. It was a crazy, desperate plan, a plan born of folklore and a deep connection to the wild world. But looking at the determined set of Cold Fox's jaw, Sarah believed him. That night, under the cover of the still raging blizzard, they set out. Not just Sarah, Cold Fox, and Emma, but two of the strongest Ute hunters as well. They carried the precious papers, now wrapped in layers of hide. Cold Fox led them to the mouth of a high canyon. He let out a low, long call, a call that was not quite human, not quite animal. They waited. The only answer was the wind. Sarah's hope began to fade. It was a fool's errand. And then, through the swirling snow, they appeared. First one, then two. Then a whole pack of gray mountain wolves. They regarded the humans with intelligent yellow eyes, not with aggression, but with a calm curiosity. Cold Fox spoke to them in the Ute tongue, his voice respectful. He unwrapped a small piece of salted deer meat, an offering, and set it on the snow. The lead wolf, a massive male with a silver-tipped coat, approached cautiously. He took the meat. Then he turned and looked back at them, as if waiting. "He will lead us," Cold Fox said, his voice filled with a quiet triumph. For 2 days, they followed the pack. It was a surreal journey, moving like ghosts through a white world, led by wild creatures. The wolves moved with an effortless grace through the deep drifts, finding paths that would have been invisible to human eyes. They led them up and over the high mountain pass that was supposed to be impassable. On the morning of the 3rd day, the storm finally broke. The sun rose on a world of glittering, pristine white, and below them, in the distance, they could see the smoke rising from the chimneys of Denver. They had made it. They had done the impossible. But their journey wasn't over. As they made their way down the mountain, the 2 Ute hunters who had guided them stopped. "This is where we leave you," one of them said. "Our world is back there. This one is yours to fix." They clasped arms with Cold Fox, gave a solemn nod to Sarah, and disappeared back into the mountains. Cold Fox, Sarah, and Emma, looking like ragged refugees from some forgotten war, walked into the office of the United States Marshal. They were met with skepticism and suspicion. But then Sarah laid the oilskin packet on his desk. She unfolded the maps. She showed him the deeds. And she told him the whole story. About her husband, about Henderson, about the murders, about the hidden village. The marshal listened, his expression growing grimmer with every word. When she was finished, he looked from the papers to the weary faces of the woman, the child, and the Ute warrior in front of him. "If this is true, Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice heavy, "this goes a lot further than just land fraud. This is a massacre." He deputized 2 of his best men on the spot. A posse was formed. They rode out that same day, not just to Sarah's Valley, but with federal warrants for the arrest of Henderson and every man on his payroll. The justice that followed was swift and absolute. Henderson and his men, caught completely by surprise, were rounded up. The trapper Sarah had left in her cellar was their star witness, happy to trade his testimony for a lighter sentence. The conspiracy unraveled, and the full extent of Henderson's crimes shocked the territory. The stolen Ute lands were returned, and the federal government, shamed into action, granted official protection to the hidden settlement. Weeks later, Sarah stood on a hill overlooking the bustling city of Denver. The snows had melted, and the first signs of spring were pushing through the cold ground. Her old life was gone forever, but a new one was beginning. Cold Fox came to stand beside her. Emma was a short distance away, laughing as she chased a butterfly. "The elders have asked me to be the bridge between their world and this one," he said. "To be their voice." "They chose well," Sarah said, smiling at him. "And what about you?" he asked, his dark eyes searching hers. "What will you do?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "Emma and we don't have a home anymore." Yes, you do, he said softly, his gaze unwavering. Your husband built a cabin as a door between two worlds. He built it for you. He built it for us. He reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and strong. A home is not a place. It is the people you build it with. Build it with me, Sarah. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were not tears of grief. They were tears of hope. She looked at her daughter, safe and happy. She looked at the man who had walked through a storm and led her out of the darkness. He was right. This wasn't an end. It was a beginning. Yes, she whispered. They had been forged in the fire of hardship and betrayal, their story written not in love letters, but in blood, snow, and courtroom documents. It wasn't the life either of them had ever dreamed of. It was better. It was real. And as they stood there with their daughter playing in the first light of spring, they knew their greatest adventure was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of frontier justice and unexpected love.